I was a junior in college, so I had this whole future ahead of me. And at the time, I was dating what I thought would be my forever person. He and I had been dating for about 3 years at this point, and I knew something just didn't feel right. But then it did start to turn into physical abuse and pressure sexually. I had finally broken up with him, so I thought I was kind of done and I was able to move on and finally break the cycle, get out of this situation. He was older than me, probably like 5 years older. At this point, we were technically broken up. And then I kind of suspected that something was wrong. I didn't feel right. All of a sudden I was sick, then I'm puking, my body's hurting in weird places, and I obviously hadn't had my monthly cycle, and I didn't know what to do. So I called him in a hysterical mess, and he took me to the store and we got a pregnancy test, and sure enough, I was, and I just melted to the floor. I melted in a puddle right there. And so we went for a drive. I think we went and got some food, and I was just like, I don't know what to do. So he was the first person to suggest it, actually. It was his idea. And I think he too was worried about repercussions. Even though he was so much older than me, he was very worried. And we first went to a clinic in the town that I was going to college at. And obviously they gave us our options. And I was early enough along that the medical process was a viable option for me, but they never called it abortion. It was always just like terminate. It's definitely a word that they choose to use to make women feel as though it's not killing a baby. And so that always kind of stuck with me looking back, like terminate. And it turns out that particular Planned Parenthood didn't perform this procedure. I would have to drive to a neighboring one a couple hours away and schedule everything. And it was just presented to me as, oh, it'll be super easy. You just take this pill, and then a couple hours later, you do this other one, buccally, which just means you put it in between your gums and your mouth, and you hold it there, and that starts the process. So it forces the body to miscarry and flush all that out, obviously. So we got all the things needed, went back, and I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. Here I am alone with this 5 years older than me boyfriend, obviously a very powerful dynamic over me. And I didn't want to do it in my home where my parents were, obviously. I also didn't want to do it in the house where I had 3 girl roommates that were all my, close friends, but none of them had any idea what I was going through. So I did it at his house. So I stayed a couple nights at his house, and I have never had such intense pain in my life. The amount of pain and suffering I went through in that 48-hour period was something I would never want to wish upon anybody, even my worst enemy. So after the buccal pills, I couldn't even hold them in my mouth for the time that they said to, because I started puking immediately and my body just couldn't handle it. So I ran to the bathroom. Everything's like starting to flush out, and then obviously the process starts, and the gut-wrenching pain, the constantly living in the bathroom, and then being in a situation where I'm not even comfortable. Here I am in this dude house, right? It's a house full of 5 different guys living in a home that are all in college, and I'm trying to keep everything quiet because I don't want them to find out either, but I didn't know where else to go at this point. And I had nobody to turn to because I was told to keep it silent and not tell my friends and not tell anybody. And then once the worst pain of it stopped, after about 48 hours, it started to subside. And I had to be really careful, because even the lightest of movements or lifting would start me to bleed again. And like the worst, heaviest period you could ever think of, times 10. And this was days later, weeks later, up to probably 2 weeks later, I was still having this issue. And at the time, I was moving back home for the summer. And every time I would do some sort of heavy lifting, like I would just start to bleed everywhere, and it was a mess, obviously, but then I couldn't tell anybody, when I'm like doubled over in pain. That alone was the hardest part. Going through the pain, the constant bleeding for weeks afterwards, and then feeling alone throughout the process. And for years, this is much, much later, I finally got away from that person in my life. Years later, found a new boyfriend. I was in my career, working, eventually got married, and we decided to wait to try for children. We wanted to have fun. We wanted to travel the world a little more, experience some things, pursue our business and career endeavors after getting married. So probably 5 years into marriage, we decided to start trying. And at this point, I assumed that I would have some problems conceiving. because, long story short, I hadn't been ovulating for a couple of years at this point. So I assumed that I would obviously have issues trying to conceive. We struggled in that arena, never got pregnant. I've had some other health issues, and especially trouble sleeping, insomnia to be specific. We decided to pursue adoption, and this young mother had actually been considering abortion and termination of her pregnancy, and I almost saw it as this redemption possibility for me, because I thought for so long that this was the universe punishing me for doing what I did and saying, well, you had the opportunity to have a child. We gave you this gift and you flushed it down the proverbial toilet, and now you want the gift. You want this miraculous child to happen in your life and start a family, and we're not going to give it to you. So that was the story I told in my head for years, struggling through the infertility. If I can just share one thing with women, it's consider the ramifications. It can mess up your hormones for sure. It took years for my cycle to even regulate again a little bit between that time and eventually when I did get married. And they don't fully explain the ramifications to you. Even when it comes down to hormonal birth control, I finally got off of that as well, because they just don't really explain the ramifications to your cycle and all the other issues as well, whether it's cancer or hormone dysregulation. I just think that whole industry is geared for the advancement of lining pockets.